as our X bands. So, see you next time. So let's build our center platform material. So I'm just going to right click in my materials folder and make a new material. And it's going to be m underscore center platform 01. And I'm just going to double click into it. And I'm going to grab all of my center platform textures, which are right here. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Drag them into my material editor. And now we're just going to plug these guys in. Again, this is a fairly simple process. At this point, I think you kind of have understood what we're going to be doing. Let's just plug in our albedo map into our base color, our metalness into our metallic slot, our emissive into our emissive slot, and again, we're going to be taking our roughness and inverting the colors, so 1 minus x for a 1 minus node, and plug that in, and plug it into our roughness. Now this is looking pretty good, but I'm feeling that our roughness is a little bit too dark. And so what I want to do is I'm going to actually take my texture sample and I'm going to multiply it by a 1 constant to be able to make it so that it's a little bit brighter. So I'm going to create a 1 constant by holding 1 on my keyboard and left clicking, and a multiply node by holding M on my keyboard and left clicking. And I'm going to click down the little drop down arrow here so we can get a preview of what our material will look like. I'm just going to plug that in. Alright, so right now it's black because we're multiplying a color by absolute black, so it's just going to be black. But I'm going to multiply this by 1.25, and we're going to see how that looks. Takes just a second. Yeah, that's looking really nice. I think that's going to work. It's going to work just fine. Awesome. So I'm going to hit save. Now we're taking the colors of this texture sample and we're multiplying it, like in Photoshop using the multiply blend mode, by something that is effectively has a higher intensity than white. So it's going to push our values up. And if I set this to something ridiculous like 5, our values way, way, way up, and which is not going to look good. That looks terrible. So I'm going to put this maybe at something like 2 and see how that looks. This looks pretty good, but this is a little bit too grungy for our tastes. This would be really good if we were doing something like first-person shootery on a gun that has been really heavily worn. But this is too much detail for the kind of game that we're going for. So I'm going to set this to 1.25, and that's a good amount of detail. And let's compile our material and see what it looks like. Drop it right on there. Yeah, that looks pretty cool. Let's go and hit play and see what it looks like when we're running around. And again, when we have all of our lights set up, this is going to look really cool. Now that we have our center platform done, let's also do our X bands in the back here. So I'm going to make a new material, m underscore X bands. And let me just move this off to the side so I can grab all our textures. Here's our roughness, here's our ambient occlusion, here's our albedo. And drag them in. Now, I didn't create a metalness map for this guy because everything on here is going to be metal, so we can just make a 1 constant and plug it into our metallic and set this to 1. And this is going to be metal. I'm going to plug this into my base color. You can see the nice and metal. I'm going to plug my ambient occlusion into an ambient occlusion slot. And again, we have to 1 minus our roughness map. Now when we plug our 1 minus node into our roughness channel, you can see that we're getting this like glass-like reflection on our metal over here. And I did that on purpose so that we have the opportunity to talk about another really useful texture node, which is called a clamp. So if you come up to your palette and type in clamp, You can grab that out. So we can take our clamp and drag it in. And effectively what a clamp is going to do is it's going to tell the value of our texture that it can't go over a certain amount and it can't go under a certain amount. So if I plug my 1- node into here and plug this straight into our roughness, we can take a look at what this is going to do. So right now we're saying that the minimum default is 0 and the maximum default is 1, where 0 and 1 is white. So we're going to say, hey, you can't ever go to complete black. You can go to 0.15, which is fairly dark, but you can't go to completely black. And that's still a little too bright. So we're going to say, how about 0.25? And while that's starting to look good, it's still a little too bright for my taste. It looks kind of like a mirror, a little bit like chrome, and we want this to be a little bit more grunged up. So let's say 0.45. Yeah, it's looking pretty good. It looks like kind of like brushed steel. And when light hits it, it's shining, and that's what we want. And additionally, I want to bring it so that my absolute highest value can only be 0.85. So that we're going to push down the black of our darker metal a bit. Bring that down a little bit more. How about 0.65? So let's save our material and see how it looks inside of our game. Yeah, those look nice. They're catching some nice highlights, and what they're going to wind up doing is they're going to help silhouette our character. When the light hits it, it creates this nice contrast between the character shadows and the background. Now, we only have a few more props that we actually need to make the materials for, which are our light, our wires, and our cable, and our vents in the background. So let's do our vents now. Let's do a new material, m underscore vents 01. Let me grab my textures. Here are our texture samples. And here is our base color. Plug that in right there. Our metalness. And now I will plug in our roughness to our 1- node. So you can actually see the difference between the roughness working with the metallic versus working with the not metallic, which is, going to be the hazard stripes right here. And again, these materials don't need to be that complicated. You might create some complicated materials, and we're going to actually create some additional functionality to our materials. But right now, this is working for our vents, because this is a background object. We don't need to put so much time and effort for something that's going to be in the background. We just have to make it cool looking. So, save that. And let's go to our materials and apply our vent. And those are looking cool back there. Now we're going to do the material for our wires. So right click, material, m underscore wires 01. And this is a really, really simple set of textures because you're not going to really be able to see the texture on there anyway. So I have a very simple ambient occlusion, a very simple normal map, and a very simple albedo. So now I'm just going to take my texture samples and I'm going to plug my ambient occlusion into the respective slot, and same with my normal map. And the same thing with my albedo map. And I'm going to make a one constant node and say, hey, you are not metallic. Because it is a simple material, we can actually just take our albedo map and invert it, and the result that we get will work for our roughness map here, because this is going to be kind of like made of like rubber or something. Cool. Save that. grab the wires, drop them on our cables, and also on our wire object. There we go. And the last material that we need to create is for our camera. So let's right-click, New Material, M underscore camera 01. So let me just grab all the textures for our camera and bring them in. So let's plug in our metallic, our albedo, and for our roughness map we're going to use a 1- node again. But if we look at our values here, we can see that they're very white. It's very high, which means that the roughness map is pretty much going to have all of the reflections kind of be diffused across the entire model, and it's not going to look very good. So I'm going to grab a multiply node, and we're going to do a little bit of finagling. So I'm going to plug my texture sample into our multiply node, and grab a 1 constant, plug that in there, and let's multiply this by 1.5. Let's see what we get there. That's looking pretty good, but I think we can go a little bit better. So let's go by 2. Cool, so now we're getting some more contrast in our values. So we'll drag that and plug that into our roughness node. Yeah, it's looking nice. And hit save. And X out. So let's see how it looks in game. I'm going to hit play. And cool. It's mostly covered by shadow, but what we can see of it looks cool. Awesome. So now that we have all of our materials for our level built, we can actually start extrapolating our level out and creating some cool functions for our materials to do neat things. So we'll start on that next.